Welcome to COVID Conversations with Lawyers. My name is Lucina, and together with my partner Ashley, we will be conducting today's interview on cross-border transactions. We are very privileged to have Ms. Jacqueline Chan, a partner at Milbank LLP, to share with us her insights on COVID-19 and its impact on cross-border transactions in Asia. In this interview, we will first discuss COVID-19 and its impacts on cross-border deals generally, and thereafter, how we think the world will change past COVID-19.
Ms. Chan is a partner in Milbank LLP's Singapore office. She was previously resident in the firm's Hong Kong office. Ms. Chan is an alumni of NUS and is qualified in both Singapore and England. Her practices focuses on a wide range of international corporate finance transactions and merger and acquisition transactions, and she regularly represents sponsors, borrowers, and lenders on complex cross-border acquisition finance transactions. In addition, she has significant experience with international debt restructurings in Asia. Ms. Chan is consistently recognized by Chambers, Euromoney, Best Lawyers, Legal 500, and IFLR, among others, as a leading lawyer for her excellence in the areas of banking and finance, restructuring and insolvency, and corporate mergers and acquisitions. She was also named to the A-list of Singapore's top 100 lawyers by Asia Business Law Journal. Ms. Chan was named among Private Funds Management's, PFM's, 30 under 40, an annual list of the most influential private equity lawyers around the world under 40 years of age, which lists outstanding lawyers who are recognized by professionals in private equity, as well as other law firms as the best of the best, according to the magazine. Ms. Chan, as we all know, you're currently a seasoned lawyer in your field. Maybe by way of introduction, we could start out by asking, how did you start out? Coming to Milbank, specializing in international transactions, was this something that you always knew you wanted to do?
Thanks so much, Lucina. Ashley, really appreciate the opportunity to do this with you. And again, it's a great initiative by NUS for this COVID series of conversations. I think it's a great opportunity to present a side of lawyers and to really introduce various different aspects of the law as it's been impacted by COVID. I think for today's discussion, it's awesome to be able to share some of the experiences that I've had, at least as an international attorney working in Milbank's Singapore office. And how that's really impacted. So a little thing before we get to me, Milbank is an international firm with its headquarters in New York. It's over 150 years old, but we've had offices in Singapore for more than 40 years now. I've been at Milbank now for close to 19 years, which is a massively long time. I came to Milbank after pupillage in Napier, and then I was also in-house counsel at one of the GLCs in Singapore, as I was a scholar there. And after that, I joined Milbank. And it's an interesting way of doing things. Most people would join a law firm first before going in-house. My route was not one I specifically chose, but I chose to serve out my bond, or part of my bond before moving to Milbank. And it was probably the best thing I did, because I learned in that period of time what I really enjoyed about law. And I discovered that even though in the university, I thought I was going to be a litigation lawyer, and I was very attracted by the concept of moots and otherwise, it turned out what I really enjoyed was deals. I loved doing deals, and I loved doing international deals. I loved the excitement of dealing with different people from different countries, doing a transaction that involved Japan and Korea and China and the US at the same time, dealing with lawyers and business consultants and people from all over from all different countries at the same time, and doing as difficult and complex a deal and negotiations as I could. And it really excited me, and it still excites me today. And so I joined Milbank, and I've been doing that for now 19 years. But that's where I am. So I ended up basically following deal flow and following deals. Singapore has been an amazing place to transact international deals from. It's a great place to be in terms of, as it truly is a meeting point for a lot of different companies and businesses. And Singapore's openness and ease of being able to get anywhere in the world was obviously a huge draw. So from the vantage point of Singapore as an international deal attorney, I found myself being able to access the world, whether it was in terms of clients, in terms of lawyers, in terms of just different transactions, whether it was buying a company in Korea or buying or investing into bonds in China, or buying a Spanish mine. It was all, we could all do it up here from Singapore for clients, not just in Singapore, but clients who were based around the world as well. So that was really how I came to working at Milbank, and really what it was like.
Wow, 19 years is really quite a long time.
Yes, I'm quite old.
Well, I'm sure no 2 days have been the same, but could you give us a rundown of like a day in the life of an international deal lawyer? How was a typical work day like for you before COVID-19?
It's a great question. No 2 days were the same, but I would say for most of us who were working these sort of transactions, we were on the road a lot. Mm-hmm. So in 2019, I would say I probably spent 41 or 42 weeks out of Singapore, at least, where I wasn't in Singapore for at least 41 or 42 weeks of the year. I spent a lot of time on planes, a lot of times in hotels. It was a necessary part of the job. It was whether it was meetings to get a deal done, a meeting to see a client, to meet somebody new. It was the norm to hop on a quick plane and go to a different country and get something done. And that was really what I've been doing for the past 18 years. So COVID was the first time since NUS maybe that I've not actually been on a plane for 8-9 months. I think in the past, perhaps my longest stretch would have been 2 months. So 8-9 months has been a very big difference for me. So I think that the general workflow used to be a lot of meetings, face-to-face meetings. It was involved a lot of travel. We obviously spent a lot of time on calls, but you could be dealing with people all over the world, whether it was Indonesia or Japan or Hong Kong, or at night you'd be dealing with the US. In the late afternoon you'd be dealing with Europe. But it was for me at least something I found incredibly exhilarating and very exciting.
Wow, the time zones must have been pretty difficult to navigate as well.
You get used to it. The worst one is actually trying to do LA, New York, London, and Asia. So that's very hard on either Asia or LA. So
the time difference.
Yeah, that one's the hardest one. But that usually means that Asia stays up very late, and LA wakes up very, very early. But apart from that, it's definitely something that we get very used to. You just learn to just do your calls late into the night.
Oh. So what happened to the universe of international deal transactions once COVID hit? I'm sure that many of these things that you guys were so used to are no longer things that were happening every day.
Absolutely. It was an interesting time. Obviously, you cast your mind back 9 months, what it was like when COVID first happened. I'm old enough to have gone through SARS. So I remember SARS, and all of us had the same expectation that it was going to be like SARS. It felt like SARS when it first started. It felt that the same uncertainty, the same, not exactly sure how bad this was going to be, but we had a playbook that came out and we followed it, which was really, masks and temperature screening and all of that, and some semi-closures of offices. And when SARS happened, in 2003, it closed deals for about 3 months. And then all of a sudden, after SARS finished, everything, the economies opened up roaring, and all lawyers and bankers were busier than they had ever been before. And that's kind of what we expected. We thought, okay, we'll hunker down, just get used to it, and in a couple of months it'll be over and we'll get back to work. I think the biggest shock and the biggest change that we didn't really expect was how quickly the entire world closed its borders. SARS didn't do that, but all of a sudden in COVID, it wasn't just Asia, but Europe, America, everywhere closed their borders, which is unprecedented and never been heard, and had never happened before. And that threw everything into disarray. You weren't sure how businesses would survive. You weren't sure how trade was going to carry on. You weren't sure what happened. If you remember, we were worried about food security here in Singapore, but that, on a greater global scale, it just basically, potentially there was a risk that the international shipment of goods and services and trade would just come to a grinding halt. And that level of uncertainty was hard to get deals done, because all of a sudden nobody really knew which companies would survive and would not. Where would you put your money? Would you continue to support a company you're already invested in? Could it survive COVID? Should you just move on and put that company into insolvency and move on to the next one? What company would you invest in next? So it was a very uncertain time. And the inability to travel meant that it was also very difficult to see clients, to make new clients, to cultivate new relationships, and to get existing deals done, because all of a sudden we were negotiating over Zoom, like what we're doing now, which is a very different, which is admittedly better in some ways than doing it on just a pure conference call, but it was something that we were all getting used to. So in a very quick span of time, I think all of us got very used to everything from Zoom to Google Hangouts to Microsoft Teams to Blue Jeans, and we all got very good, and we got used to our preferred video conferencing provider. But it did create a very, very different world for deal attorneys like myself, where we were not only able to work together in a team in an office, we were now working individually from the confines of our own homes. And on top of that, we were working through video conferencing chats, both with each other and with our clients.
Wow, Zoom must have been like second home.
I tried doing 6 or 7 Zoom calls a day, sometimes more. But yes, it's I have to say, Zoom has been, video conferencing. I think when I started 20 years ago as a lawyer, at that time, the internet was just taking off, and we were still investing in telcos, and everybody at that time was saying, don't worry, bandwidth that's necessary. Everybody's going to be on video conferencing, and this is going to be the way of the future. And they were right. They were just 20 years too early. So the future has arrived, and I don't think we're going back from here.
So it sounds like the COVID-19 pandemic really put a spanner in the works of international deals. I imagine that the deals themselves would have been similarly affected. Were there any deals that failed as a result of COVID?
That's a really good question. So it was really hard, I think, for both lawyers, bankers, everybody who was involved in the universe of deal making, when COVID started, to figure out exactly what this meant. We all knew the world had changed in a blink of an eye. We all knew still, however, that work needed to get done. And yet at the same time, we needed to figure out exactly what that work was going to be. I would say, though, that for most law firms have kept busy, but because deal work continues, maybe not new deals, but trying to figure out what to do with existing deals. Deals did die. So I think there were a couple of things that happened. In many international acquisitions, there is a concept of material adverse effect or material adverse event, which means that if something that's materially adverse to the business and the financial conditions of a company, sometimes, depending on how the deal goes, the buyer of that business has the ability to say, I no longer want to buy this company, and walk away. And there is a significant way and deviations, and there are ways that you draft what exactly constitutes a material adverse event. Typically, until today, they did not include pandemics. Now they might. But the question always became, well, if a pandemic occurred that was so out of the blue and nobody could expect. And your business, for example, you were a retail brand that sold lingerie in beautiful stores around the world. If you were a retail brand that sold lingerie in beautiful stores all over the world and you were suddenly subject to a massive worldwide lockdown, would the buyer of that brand be able to say, it's a material adverse change, I no longer want to buy that? And the seller is going to say, no, you have to keep buying the brand because we didn't negotiate specifically that you could buy it if you could get out of the deal if a pandemic happened. And the buyer is going to say, I don't really want to buy it anymore. So that was one of these deals that failed. It was a big retail brand that did not go through. And in the end, they've reached a settlement on that. But there were many other deals like that. I think on my watch, I think maybe 2 or 3 of the deals I was working on, they went through, but with renegotiations of pricing and terms, because the buyer said, look, I'll still buy it, but it's no longer the same business because COVID has hit. And if you were negotiating in April or May, when COVID was still very fresh and you had no idea what was going to happen going forward, you would often be quite keen to negotiate and take less just to get the deal done. So there were quite a number of deals that did not go through. A lot of deals that had not, I'm only referring to these deals I just referenced, were already signed and then renegotiated. There were other deals that we were working on. I was working on an airport deal that didn't go through because of COVID, because of just the sheer, the immense impact to the travel industry. I was working on a deal involving hotels that didn't go through because of the sheer impact on, again, the tourism industry around the world. And that's just a small slice. So we've obviously seen that COVID has had a chilling impact on quite a lot of deal flow. In fact, I think in the first quarter of 2020, the Deal Logic said that it was down 35. The volume of M&A activity in first quarter of 2020 was down 35% compared to the last quarter of 2019. So you can see that there was a massive chilling effect on deal flow everywhere in the world.
Were there any specific efforts that were taken in order to try and save some of these deals? I know there were renegotiations and things, but maybe you could share more with us about what was done to kind of salvage the situation.
It's a great question. So usually, if in non-COVID world, if somebody came back and said, I'm having second thoughts, I don't want to do this anymore, everybody sort of meets up together to talk about this in person and try to find a way. We didn't have the chance to do that here. So it was a flurry of phone calls. And of course, these are very sensitive commercial discussions, because you can't do a deal unless both parties are happy with it. So you are in for a negotiation. So it was even more time on Zoom, even more time on the phone, a lot of times crossing different time zones and borders. A lot of people left countries and were living in different countries in the first part of COVID. So it was a lot of discussion to try and salvage deals. I would say that things that did get through. So we had, I just named 2 that off the mind that didn't go through on the airport and the hotel. There were others that had to deal with technology companies that didn't go through. One was on medical health. The other one was on product delivery. They didn't go through, and there was a lot of time spent trying to retrieve it and revive it. Usual techniques would go towards renegotiation of terms, whether it's pricing, trying to delay some of the capital commitments around it, trying to find new investors to come in and shore up the vision for the company. Some of them worked and others didn't. But unfortunately, I think I would say that during COVID, and this doesn't apply for everybody, we were very busy, but I would say I've probably had more failed deals during those first 4 or 5 months of COVID than I've had in the course of a year, in a normal year.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's really sad. We always want our clients to do well and succeed.
Mm-hmm.
but it was an interesting thing to navigate, I think, for all of us. And all of us are doing this obviously for the first time. So it was an interesting experience for us and our clients to go through together. We found out very quickly what worked better, what didn't work, and how to try and find common ground. But in the first 3 months of COVID, until probably about June, July, it was really hard to see how it was going to get better. If you remember, if you cast my mind back to June, July, the entire world seemed to be getting worse and worse and worse. So it was really hard to see when we would ever get out of COVID.
Were you able to link your experience with COVID with previous experiences with SARS? Like, were there any analogies that can be drawn and any lessons that could be learned, like in this pandemic currently?
Yes, actually, I think SARS. I think from the public health side, Asia was very quick to understand what COVID meant from a public health perspective. I think the experience that we all had with SARS meant that we were very understanding of what was required of us. And so we were able to do that very well. And I think that helped Asia sort of find an equilibrium. Think about Taiwan, think about Hong Kong, Korea, and Japan. And I think all of us basically understood. On a deal perspective, we all understood, looking at SARS, we all understood very quickly that in SARS, a lot of things came to a grinding halt in SARS. It was much scarier than what COVID is, to be honest, SARS, because we didn't have a lot of information when it first started. But so things came to a grinding halt. We didn't know how bad things were. But it got, I think what we sort of expected with SARS was that if you hunkered down and did what you expected, what you were told, and and just waited it out, things got better very quickly. And I think that's what Asia did, and Singapore did that, and Hong Kong did that. We basically followed the public health directives, and we saw things come back to life. I think COVID is very different because now COVID is completely global. And there was this saying in New York when COVID hit that we're not, all of us are in it together. We're not out of it. We're not out of it until all of us are out of it, and that's very true. In fact, it's becoming more and more true. And I think so we will get out of it, and I'm confident of that now. But it's just a matter of when. And thankfully, it looks like where we are today, it looks as though we're hopeful that there is a way through it now. But yes, there were definitely things that we saw, and I think what we saw in SARS as well was which industries would likely be resilient. What would happen after SARS, and so there was a need and a necessity for people to gear themselves up to prepare for the end, because when the end came, what we saw in SARS was that people had been sitting on the sidelines waiting for SARS to finish, and from a deal perspective, they just came into the market in a big way, and we suddenly saw a huge uptick in the number of deals that people were doing.
I think previously you mentioned several categories of deals in your experience that failed. Like retail failed. You've experienced the hospitality industry suffering. Yes. Is there a particular category of deals that tend to suffer more, and a particular category of deals that tend to be more resilient?
Well, I think each of us will have different experiences. So I'll speak to myself and my colleagues and what we saw. I would say that the deals that were most resilient had to do with power and infrastructure. So anything that had to do with energy or roads or telecoms, broadband, those continued to need to get done. Anything that had to do and those were active in the past, and they continue to be active in COVID. I wouldn't say that they went up or they went down. They were very steady. The ones that went up had to do with the digital economy. So anything to do with online education was very important. Frankly, online medical care. Any of those sort of deals, logistics deals, online logistics deals, were very, very active. those, I think the digital economy deals definitely went up by quite a lot. The ones that went down and I think struggled because of COVID were definitely airlines, aviation, hotels, tourism and industry, and frankly, in the first part of COVID, F&B. Anything that had a mid-market chain F&B was, you needed to put in a lot more money to keep it going. And it became a long-term survival game. Could you put in enough money to keep it going to get past COVID? As a firm, we worked on a lot of the retail bankruptcies in the US, like JCPenney's, Saks, J. Crew. Those were all our deals, and I would expect that there will be other similar, business issues with businesses out here, like in Singapore, Robinsons, where they filed for insolvency as well. I think those brick and mortar stores are going to have to find, if they're not restructuring now, which I'm sure they are, they may find themselves, that would be a challenging business for a little while longer until COVID is really over and then consumer foot traffic comes back up to its retail stores and away from digital.
So what was the impact of all these developments on international deal lawyers like yourself?
I think what we saw was a very big change in how deals were being done. I think in April, May, June, July, which in 4 months, it's a long time. It's a quarter of the year. We're usually closing a lot of deals. We're usually traveling a lot. You're seeing a lot of people. Between April to July, we were all sitting at home still working from home, still working on deals. We saw that the deals had changed at that stage. A lot of them were rescue deals. So either investors were trying to save companies that they had already invested in. We were doing a lot of restructuring of deals. So whereby people who had put money into deals, into companies, were trying to restructure their loans to the companies so as to give the companies more breathing room. The deals that were busy were, as I said, the digital technology deals, and those carried on apace. There were still investors who were trying to invest in those deals, and so that was quite a lot of work that went on. And the infrastructure deals. So anything to do with energy and infrastructure, we're trying to invest in companies who dabbled in infrastructure. Those were still very active. And we found that people were still trying to do due diligence on that. So one key thing of these deals is that you need to do due diligence. Investors or lenders who do these deals need to basically fact check that these companies exist, that the assets that they say exist do indeed exist. And in the past, these used to be physical site visits. You would actually fly to the place where the mall was, or where the company headquarters were, where the factory was, or where the power plant was, and you take a view of it. You would then get a sense as to how the business was run. What was the condition of the business? What was the condition of the equipment? You get a chance to speak to people and get a feel for what you were going to put your money into. It was just due diligence. With COVID, in the first 3 months of COVID, all of that came to a halt because nobody could travel. And so very few new deals were being effected. From April onwards, people started to find workarounds. In fact, now we see that there are lots of drone tours of companies now. We are now able to use Zoom comfortably, and people are now comfortable doing interviews via Zoom. And so people and they're now able to get local agents who are able to go into these companies, and there's a workaround around it. Still not to the level. There are still lots of investors who may not agree to take this on and who would still prefer to have a physical due diligence check. But there are now people who are starting to understand that they can't wait forever, and so they're willing to use this for now. So I think that has made a big difference. We've also seen the use of technology just increase and enhance. So we're seeing a lot more virtual data rooms where everything is put into a virtual room, and you look at those room and you download all your documents from there. One thing I've seen from a lawyer's perspective is, you know, I'm old-fashioned and I like paper. I like reading off paper, but you can't read off thousands of documents. You can't print thousands of documents at home. And so we've all gotten much better with reading online and marking up documents and reviewing documents online. And that's been a big technology skill. You know, Zoom, obviously, and we use Zoom and all the other video conferencings. They've also gotten better in terms of being able to facilitate side discussions, breakout rooms, and all of that, which make negotiations and discussions online a little bit better. I think it's personally, I still feel like we need to do in person at some stage, but it's at the, you know, until that's permitted, this is much better than just doing phone calls for me. But yes, so I think it did create a change. Technology played a huge, has made, I think if this had happened during SARS, really there would have been no work going on because we didn't have this technology of Zoom or virtual data rooms or you know, drones or anything like that. I think if this had happened in 2003, we would have taken a break from work for about 6 months and sat at home. Instead, you know, and the concept of work from home, I mean, even in SARS, we still went to the office. We didn't really stay home. So now, you know, things have changed, things have moved on. I think we are seeing really how the world has changed with technology and what the future is going to look like a lot more. But yeah, what we're doing today would not have happened when SARS happened. We would literally just have, everybody would have been like, okay, let's just take a break for 6 months and we'll come back later. So, and then there was nothing to do, so you just sit at home.
Well, it would have been a well-deserved break.
Exactly. But it was, SARS was very different. Well, it was probably scarier because the fatality rate, I think at that time, was higher. And with a lot less information, a lot less understanding. But it also suddenly disappeared. And I remember that, I think it was by maybe August or September, it was kind of gone. And I was living in Hong Kong at that time. And we were all just outdoors in a big rock concert with the Rolling Stones, and, you know, and Santana was playing, and it was great. And it was, you know, but that was 6 months, and it became very clear in about June or July of this year that COVID was not going away in 6 months. So we were stuck with this for a lot longer than SARS lasted.
Yeah, well, I mean, now it's been more than a year since COVID-19 has actually hit the world. So was there any like difference in how deals are doing across regions, or have all regions been dealing with it pretty much the same way?
That's a really good question. So yes, everyone has, I would say what we've seen, and I'll take a global view for this. For deal lawyers like ourselves, COVID has impacted the different areas of the world differently. So in Asia, I would say that for us, you know, apart from technology, infra, energy, and deals which were already pretty much in force when COVID struck, we saw a downturn for about 3 to 6 months. And now things are pretty much busier than they ever have been. But we did take a dip. I would say that in the US, it was probably the minute COVID happened, I think things were much busier for lawyers. And that was because the US went immediately into restructuring. All of the businesses immediately went into restructuring, and that meant not just restructuring their debt, but also selling themselves or finding new investors and finding new money. And so for a deal attorney where you work in the corporate finance sector of all of those industries, it just means that you're really, really busy. And so the US was incredibly busy. Anything to do with capital markets, bond issuances was very busy. So you saw a lot of new IPOs, you saw a lot of new bond issuances all over the world. And that continued to be very busy for us as well. And in Europe, what we saw was a massive amount of restructuring, and now a lot of mergers and acquisitions and leverage finance has come back. So I would say in Asia itself, it also deferred. China was the first to recover its deal activity. It recovered very quickly. Probably by June, it was very, very active. They were willing to make a lot. They were willing to do a lot more activity, both internally as well as externally. And I would say that probably the trend has followed very much on how well countries have recovered from COVID. So the faster the country has found its footing in the new normal with COVID, we've seen deal activity follow. The only outlier I would say would be the capital markets, because the capital markets has been extremely busy. As you know, just because of the stimulus packages around the world, there's been a lot of money that's flowed into the capital markets, and that has basically fueled a big boom in that area for us. So yes, so it's very complex, but as a general rule, outside of the US, and maybe we've seen that M&A deal activity, lending activity has generally followed the COVID recovery or the COVID normalization. So Singapore, I think Singapore is an interesting thing. We've actually, from an industry perspective, I think we're going to find that a lot of our opportunities for investment will actually be outside of Singapore. And I think our ability to service those industries and service those opportunities is very much dependent. I think Singapore's importance as a service hub actually grows post-COVID, and it drives a lot of the necessity for us to remain an open economy and open for cross-border travel, to continue to attract seasoned professionals, so that we can continue to service the larger deal universe outside of Singapore as well. And I think that's basically where it's going to go. It's going to be much, much more active after this, and it's an opportunity for Singapore to really show its prevalence and show its importance in that area.
Well, it seems like there were a lot of adaptations that international deal lawyers as well as clients had to go through. So on a more lighthearted note, what do you miss the most about pre-COVID life, aside from traveling, of course?
Oh, really? Is there anything else to miss? No, I'm kidding. I think that's a great, I like that question. I really do miss the ability to meet new people in the flesh. I think I miss
the ability to shake hands with people.
Yes, or give somebody a hug.
See them without a mask.
Exactly. I miss that. I miss the ability to have casual, random interactions, because you don't get that anymore, right? Every interaction you have now is planned.
Behind a barrier.
Yes, behind a masked barrier, but also you don't really run into people randomly anymore. So I really miss that. I think it adds to the richness and the tapestry of life to meet new people, to learn new things all the time, and unexpectedly, not just planned. You don't just turn up someplace where you're going to meet new people, but the unexpected joys of meeting somebody new and learning something or finding out something that you never knew before, that you didn't expect to. That's missing. That little joie de vivre, of just enjoying the little things in life, it's just not there. And it's not to say that what we have is bad. I think we are incredibly lucky to be here, and we're incredibly lucky that we're all safe and healthy, and that life is as normal as it is. But I do miss people. I miss Singapore Airlines too. That for sure. I never thought I was ever going to be missing Changi Airport, but I really miss Changi Airport.
Oh. Well, all things considered, how well do you think that this universe of international deal transactions has weathered this pandemic? Do you think it has done pretty well for its standards, or is there any improvements that could have been done on hindsight?
Well, I think, I've been talking really about the period up to about July 2020. What I would say is since July, since about August, September onwards, what we've seen is that everybody is now working harder than they used to work. The deal flows are back. People are really trying to get deals done. Investors, particularly, I would say the investable money is working really hard to find ways to access So most investors, private equity or strategics or otherwise, the best investment opportunity is where you have a dislocation. So where there is a need for money and companies that need the money and therefore, and nobody else in the market can provide it. And right now with COVID, companies that would in a non-COVID world be strong potentially now have a need for a new investor or a new lender to give them cash. And that's the best time to try and find a deal. And so that's what we're seeing now. So I would say that since about August, September, the deal flow has definitely kicked up. It's been busier than it's ever been. And what we are seeing, and I would expect that that would go into, definitely next year. So from where I sit in Singapore, as a deal-making hub, it's definitely carrying on. I think we're very fortunate that we are able to that we actually have retained a lot of our talent, a lot of the international, whether they're professionals or service providers have stayed in Singapore. And, and we are now able to still access our clients outside of Singapore and service them for all their deals. I'm not the deals that I'm working on, and none of them are based in Singapore. They're everywhere else in the world. And it's exciting to be able to still work that through, even just being here and not being able to travel. So I am hopeful that come January, February, March 2021, if we're still unable to travel, that that this method of working will continue, that we'll still be able to service clients and service international cross-border deals as effectively as we do today. I think I still do miss the ability to see people and negotiate and conduct multilateral negotiations in person around a meeting room table. And I think I'm not the only one that misses that. I think a lot of us who are in this deal world miss that extraordinarily much. But until that happens, I think we will find our way through it. We'll make do with what we can. But I think that we've seen a real recovery in the deal economy in terms of people wanting to do deals. And that bodes really well for hopefully it's like a SARS-like recovery after SARS.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed. This video could age really badly. I don't know, but it's my hope at least.
Well, after we spoke so much about all these, what would you say is the most key takeaway from this COVID pandemic that international deal lawyers like yourself would tell generations later?
So I think I would encourage anyone who's interested in deals like I was 20 years ago, when I realized that that's really what got me excited and really what kept me going and really what made me get up in the morning and be keen to go to work, where you really enjoy the cut and thrust of negotiations and of getting deals done and having people really achieve what they are excited to. It's like making an investment or closing a loan. It's something that's a great sense of achievement and satisfaction. And I loved that. I loved that work to that point. And I love the ability to meet and deal with different people from all over the world. And that's why I really turned up in the international legal community and doing cross-border transactions. I think COVID put a little bit of a stopgap measure in some of those things because we couldn't meet, because we couldn't fly, and because deals did falter for a while. I think now that it's back, I think what I would encourage is it's really important to stay flexible as a lawyer, to really have an attitude of learning, of excitement about trying something new, to really be keen to put yourself out there and really just keep trying, even when you're not sure what happens tomorrow. Like when in April and May and June, it was hard to see how we would ever get out of COVID. This was a time when the numbers in the US were ramping up beyond what anybody expected. There were no lockdowns being ordered anywhere. And then we went into summer, and then you could tell that the numbers were just going to get worse from there. And we realized, at least for our world, that if the US and Europe didn't necessarily come out of this anytime soon, it would be hard because Asia would never be able to open up fully. We would never be able to get travelers in and out of Europe. And so it was hard to see and hard to, at that time, to go, okay, so then how long are we going to be in this stasis for? I think since then we're all much more optimistic. And I think the level of just excitement and enthusiasm for just doing deals, and really it is an ability to work with an amazing team of lawyers, an amazing team of bankers, and great clients that really keeps me going and really gives me an excitement of just waking up in the morning and going to work. Or in my case right now, sitting at my desk in my house. But it's still the same thing. And I think that for law students going out into the workplace, for young attorneys growing up within a firm, to be able to maintain that level of excitement and just knowing why you're doing this is really, it really helps. And it's really important. And not letting something as, eventually what will pass as COVID will, get you down.
Any last words of advice for our viewers?
It's been great speaking with you, and thank you for the opportunity to connect and discuss. There's a lot to cover on topics, whether it's cross-border mergers and acquisitions, or international lending, or even international restructuring transactions, which is a lot of the work that I do. It's not, if anyone is interested in asking, please reach out. I'd be more than happy to speak about it, or really wanting to understand how that world works in terms of both the actual legal principles that arise, that apply to it, or in terms of the transactional practice and the disciplines associated, and what you would look out for in terms of being engaged in a role like that. But I think it would be just awesome to stay in touch. And if anybody has any other questions, please let me know.
So I guess that brings us to the end of our interview today. Once again, I'd like to thank Chan to speak with us. And we hope that our viewers have learned something new from this interview. And hopefully we'll see you in another edition of Conversations with Lawyers. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.